Bonjour and buongiorno. I'm Cynthia, your instructor. Here are a few things about me so you know my credentials for teaching this class. I lived in France for 6 years, married to a Frenchman, and I have 2 adult French stepchildren. My stepson is currently spending 2 years in Canada looking at using his engineer master's degree. And I also lived in Italy for 3 years as an adventurer after burning out on my nonprofit executive director job. I've traveled to 30 countries with many more on my list. Traveling is definitely my passion. When I lived in France, I partnered with a Brit and created the French Alps and Provence tours. I also wrote the only English-language Chambéry e-guidebook, also a popular e-book about moving overseas, which you'll get free with this class. And I also sell my travel video clips on stock footage sites. I'm also a professional grant writer and a nonprofit consultant for Network for Good and for Donor Path. When I lived in Italy, I taught business English in Trieste to the largest insurance company in Italy at their headquarters, and I also worked as an editor at the United Nations in Rome. So, a personal story, or a couple of personal stories, which will tell you how I ended up in Europe. As I mentioned, I lived outside the United States for a total of 9 years in 2 different European countries. My first experience was in Italy. I moved to Italy because I wanted to make a change in my life. I definitely wasn't satisfied with my career, and I wanted an adventure. I had studied in Italy as an undergraduate, and I vacationed there for 15 years. Italy was where I went when I needed renewal or rejuvenation, so I thought, why not try and live there too? So I quit my executive director job in 1998, and I sold everything I owned except what my friends could store in their attics. I had only casual acquaintances in Italy. I spoke lower intermediate Italian. There was no job waiting for me either. Worse yet, I didn't even have the legal documents which would allow me to live and work in Italy. I do not recommend this now. Things have tightened up since the 1990s. So with butterflies in my stomach and doubts in my head, I got on that plane with 2 suitcases and, yes, with 2 cats, and landed in Florence, Italy several hours later. I managed to live and work in Italy for 2 years. I studied Italian in Florence. I worked at United Nations in Rome for 6 months. I had roommates from Russia, America, and Sicily. I was 38 years old, by the way. I was kind of past the roommate stage. I also lived in San Donato di Piave in northern Italy, just outside of the city of Venice. And I worked as a business English teacher at Lloyd Adriatico headquarters in Trieste. They were the largest insurance company in Italy at the time. I had never taught anything before in my entire life. I had not a clue what I was doing. But with a lot of research, a lot of hard work, a lot of long hours, I ended up doing okay. I also traveled and interviewed for the associate director job for the Syracuse University Center in Florence. However, I didn't get the job. And in all, it was not a bad experience. I learned just how resilient and innovative and strong I was during those 2 years. The second time I moved to Europe was because I fell in love. My future French husband and I met on a train going from Nice to Avignon. He got on the train, sat across from me, and we proceeded to stare at each other for the next 30 minutes. I could not stand it any longer. I asked him if he spoke English. No. Did he speak Italian? No. He asked me if I spoke French. Nope, not a word. And German? Nope, not yet. After staring at each other for another hour, I got off the train in Avignon and waved goodbye. Oh, well, opportunity lost. 2 days later, while I was eating breakfast in my hotel in the dining room, the same man showed up with an armful of English learning language books, and in broken English he asked me if I would spend the day with him. We spent that day, and then the next day, and the next day, discovering Provence, and in the process fell in love. He eventually explained to me, after his English improved, that he'd gone back to the French Alps after he'd said goodbye to me on the train, and he was camping with his friends, and he couldn't stop thinking about me. His friends got sick of his daydreaming, and they told him, go find her, and if you find her, we'll buy you a Ferrari. We never did get that Ferrari, by the way. He returned to Avignon, waited outside my hotel for many hours, for 2 days, and he'd finally found me in the breakfast room. That began a 3-year long-distance relationship. Over time, it became harder and harder to be apart. One of us had to relocate, and he had young children. I worked from home, so I decided to be the one to move. And in the end, the marriage did end after 7 years, but I have no regrets, since I gained new friends. I traveled all over France. I have 2 French stepchildren whom I adore. I cooperate a tour company in France. I have my permanent residency in France so that I can live and work in that country for the rest of my life. As a result, I have the best access to the best health care I've ever had at virtually no cost. I have traveled all over the country. I can apply for my French citizenship in a few years. And from these 2 experiences of living overseas, I have learned a great deal about how to make this challenging move in a way that limits your pitfalls. The course is an effort to share my knowledge and my experience so you don't make the same mistakes I did. I've also had amazing experiences, met wonderful people, traveled to stunning locations. I've experienced and learned a culture rooted in ancient traditions, and also eaten cuisine fit for the angels. The next video will talk about what we'll learn in this class.